including when we have our G3 on the top of the show. So day 2 of Bob Bowlsby leaving, and there's all sorts of articles about possibilities. One of them, and Craig, you sent me an email. I sent an email to you guys about a story about some of the options that might be there. And one of them actually that was brought up, we've talked about Mack Rhoades. He's in a 10-year deal. He discussed that yesterday. And he's going to stay as the AD at Baylor, was Dr. Livingstone's name, who's been rising up the charts, the president at Baylor. I don't think that is going to happen, but that says quite a bit that her name was on a lot of these lists as well.
Yeah, I mean, the article listed like 30 people, so, it was kind of wide-ranging, named like, I don't have exact figures, I didn't count it, but it felt like there's quite a few names that were mentioned, both, current ADs in the Big 12. I think they named, Mack Rhoades, but then followed up by saying that, he had just signed a 10-year deal. They mentioned Kirby Hocutt from Texas Tech, who, was obviously on the playoff committee, mentioned, a couple of other ADs around the league, and then mentioned some outside candidates and some people that, quite frankly, most of us have probably never really heard of. And that might be who ends up being the person when all is said and done. But, yeah, Linda Livingstone was mentioned amongst the presidential candidates that could be possible, and I'd never really given it much consideration. I mean, Mack Rhoades I certainly had, but when I saw her name, I was like, oh, wow, that actually makes a ton of sense. I could totally see her serving as a commissioner with her basketball background and her love for athletics and just her resume. So, yeah, that was kind of cool to see her brought up, and it says a lot about, Baylor, that your AD and your president are being talked about as, potential candidates for a pretty big role as Big 12 commissioner. But, a lot of other schools and a lot of other people mentioned as well. But I think that just speaks well to what they've got going on right now.
Yeah, I wonder, when you read all these names, you wonder, what is a better job, AD, president, or commissioner? And it's not just about the money. I would assume the money is pretty good to be a conference commissioner.
I bet it's $3 to $4 or $5 billion and maybe more.
But money isn't everything. So say you're making 2.5 as an AD, maybe 3 or 4 as an AD. Maybe, I'm sure that, Greg Sankey probably makes 7. I mean, he's got to be worth that for being the most powerful power broker in a sport full of power brokers. But, is it worth the headache at certain levels? So that could take a lot of people out of this.
A commissioner has 10, 12, 14, 16, how many teams you might have. An AD has hundreds of athletes they deal with. And then, of course, as you mentioned, it just all depends. And Mack Rhoades, I thought he was very transparent yesterday in what he said about thinking at some point that he might want to be a conference commissioner, but he also then eventually said why he did not. And one of them was he couldn't be a fan of anybody, really all 12 teams, but he couldn't show some of the emotions that he does right now as the AD at Baylor. We have some legacy